Hello, and thanks so much for joining us. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America. Well, almost every day, Black Americans are forced to confront the reality, the prospect of racism, whether through police violence, discriminatory policies, or daily microaggressions, as they're called. The threat of violence is ever present. My guest today is Khary Saeed Jones, an award-winning director, storytelling professor at Tufts University, and an advocate whose latest film, Night Fight, explores the lasting impact of racial violence through his own traumatic experience. And Khary, thank you so much, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
This experience, even though within the contiguous USA you can find those threats, but your experience happened in Canada. Talk to us about that.
Well, I was, with family on my wife's side in 2017. This was actually just days before the Unite the Right rally, much farther south in Charlottesville. And I have kind of a writing practice where I get up and wherever I am, and I try to get some writing in early in the morning as possible. We were also going to be driving back to the States that day, so I filled up, after writing, I filled up my gas tank, and I clocked this guy, across in one of the other lanes.
So this happens at the gas station.
Yes, exactly. It starts there. And I noticed the little Canadian stick flag coming off the aerial antenna, and then I kind of put it behind me because it was just, it's probably happened before, right? What hadn't happened before was he followed me out of the gas station. It's early in the morning, it's still relatively dark. And for about 20 minutes, he followed me kind of further and further into the mountains there. I did not want to bring him back to the place where we were staying. So I was actually actively not trying to go back to our home there.
And then, so there wasn't even a physical interaction.
No. So it ended when I felt at some point like I left a message on my wife's voicemail. I felt like I could not, drive anymore because I was genuinely going to be in an area that was, there were no homes, and I just stopped in the middle of the road. And I still remember like looking in the rearview mirror, and this guy had just dead cold eyes. Like it was like just almost expressionless. It was just very strange, very odd. I spun the car around. I just, and drove in the opposite direction. And he did not follow me at that point. And that ended it.
But it was such a troubling memory to you that you decided to turn your filmmaking skills to exploring this whole idea of the prospect, the threat of, and how that can actually not ruin your life, but certainly affect your life from that point on.
Yeah. It's a lot of times when I'm talking about a film, I kind of ask this question, like, what does it take to document a feeling? I pose that question because the film, preceding the film were these self-portraits that I was making in private. I felt moved to, at one point, I cover this in the film, to film myself as a corpse.
I know, and
it's very grim. It's a kind of a very grim.
So you were drawing that.
So these were video self. So these were me, as a filmmaker, right, staging these scenes. And
that you could have been a corpse, right? So
so that's sort of the imagination is a thing that is mysterious how it works. And there was definitely a feeling that I did not have a way of expressing. And this was a way of kind of coming to grips with it.
Right. So first was the images, and then you decided to make it into a film.
Right.
And such an interesting, beautiful way of doing it is that you are sharing this experience with your sons,
Yeah.
you know, who, as someone says, you know, in the film, who look like us, people who look like us have to deal with this.
Yeah. Yeah, there's this sort of the idea of the talk. So my son, at the time where this was all kind of coming to a head as a film or as sort of an idea that I needed to sort of like kind of deal with was, probably 10, 11. And, you're kind of creeping up on the point where you need to sort of give them a sense of the law.
Give them the official talk.
Right.
Right.
And so but I felt like my talk was, there was a kind of a specificity and a kind of an urgency to it at the moment that I felt was very complicated. And the film and his involvement in it was a way of kind of forming a bridge, right? And not having to sort of unload on him, but to sort of create kind of another way of us to relate, to talk. There was a short story that I wrote that was related to sort of some of the things that I was feeling or thinking about with respect to the film, and he got excited about that. And he is as an artist, and was interested.
I know he's an artist and
Yeah.
actually participates. I was shocked to learn that the animation in the film towards the end is his.
It's his work.
But the question, for all of us is we know that our sons have to, and our daughters have to have that talk.
Yeah.
But the effect of it being in this film, and it has some foreboding in it. And at one point, your son asks you, have you seen a therapist? So
Right.
talk to us about that.
Yeah, well, it's so the interviews that we and the recordings that I made spanned probably a year and a half, and they were very informal. And yeah, we cover some pretty, when I begin to sort of get into sort of the actual, story of how this film started, that I just shared with you, he was rightly disturbed and he was rightly concerned, right?
Right, that his dad had been somehow damaged in a way. Are you sure you're okay, Dad?
Yeah. And that's a question. The film was very much part of me, kind of telling myself and feeling like I was okay, and kind of talking with other Black folk who had experiences like mine or unlike mine, but were equally sort of like challenging in certain ways. That was my way of kind of like getting right, so to speak.
So it is a documentary, and in some cases it's a spy thriller because you go looking for this guy. It's a detective story. But you use some of our leading historians to give grounding for this experience that you couldn't shake off. So why don't we take a look at, we have a clip.
You said George Floyd, and I thought back to Michael Brown. Now I'm not sure, right, where I was. The confirmation of the wisdom that some of these cops are at war with us. It was the impunity of the cop who just knew it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that's a part of the fear, the threat. Okay?
Yeah, that's Vincent Brown, who was a historian of slavery, really, at Harvard. So one of the things that I wanted to do with the film is that there are people who I know, and who I know have had these experiences, and yet I kind of wanted to know like how their work, right? In some ways, sort of like kind of didn't originate in these moments, but was shaped, right, by these experiences that they had personally, but also obviously one thing I did not say was that the actual decision to make the film came out of that spring, that COVID spring when Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd, and this was like so much part of this was in the air in a way that it was thick in the air in a way that it had not been, and the isolation of COVID too, just sort of like I felt like I needed a bridge. I needed to sort of do more with this experience, and I didn't want to be didn't want this film to be about me as much as I wanted it to be a conversation.
And part of that conversation is with the Wilson sisters.
Yes.
Which is, tell us about them. I mean, they had
They're amazing.
Quite a story.
They're amazing. In doing research prior to going, planning to go back to this town, I discovered, by way of journalists, who cover their area, the Wilson sisters, whose father was killed, under very suspicious circumstances in the early 1950s, when Carolyn, the oldest, was 3, and Sylvia, the youngest, was just months old, really. So Sylvia really had never known her father, beyond that. And he was the first black foreman, in this town, Collingwood. He was kind of a revered figure in the community. On their mother's side, their family has been in the area for since the mid 19th centuries, and were the proprietors of a restaurant that was kind of a Green Book sort of stop. Any case, he was hazed on the job, tarred, kind of months before this terrible incident happened, and later that year he died on the job. He was, it's kind of fell out of a tree, off of a ladder, and the truck sort of it's just.
But the story seems to be, as they tell it, a little more mysterious.
It's mysterious. It's mysterious.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
There might have been a rope, and there might have been a lynching, and there might have been.
And
they have something of like a museum that they've set up, right?
Yeah, they've really dedicated their life to educating people in the region about the history of black folk in North America and in Canada. Before they had a museum, they would take these. They would go around to schools and to churches, and present artifacts and images, photographs of the black presence in the region.
Right. So you say in the region. Place it for us, so we
this
know
is
how far up from the United States this is in Canada.
This is one of the last stops actually on the Underground Railroad, right? This is Collingwood, Ontario, about 2 hours north of Toronto. They would travel around, as far down as Toronto, to educate, young people primarily, and church population, church congregations. This museum it's kind of like a marvel.
Sure.
It's like 10, I think, structures. One large house that kind of walks you along the history of the black presence in North America from the Middle Passage on. And from there you kind of travel around and have these very intimate spaces, and oftentimes they are kind of giving you the tour themselves, and kind of guiding you through.
Right. So you discovered the Wilsons and their museum, and learned the history, or what may have happened to their dad.
Yeah.
But now, so what was so interesting is you in your car driving, retracing the
route,
pathway, the route of this. How many years after this incident was it?
So this was I went back in the fall of 2023.
So now and the incident was
2027.
So
2017, sorry.
2017, right. But here you are, you're driving along in the car and you'd say, I'd like to report, somebody who's been trailing me.
Yeah.
And you call the police, and then this incident, when exactly did this happen?
Right.
How many years ago? But you had an idea of the truck, the vehicle.
Right. I felt, going back to this place was a way of kind of closing a loop.
Right.
It was. I mean, I was here I came with a small crew to sort of to document this process. I didn't know what the conversation with the Wilsons or with the gentleman Bam, Wesley Kidd, was going to be like, but I wanted to close a loop, and I felt like I had to sort of put something on the record.
Such an emotional. You've already won editing awards for.
I did. I was a very kind of a wonderful thing to come out of a recent screening. So.
Right. For that, and visually, is beautiful in the story. I want to put you in the context of you having created this, which is a serious look at, for people who would slough off, well, he didn't hit you actually, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
No, it's a years-long intergenerational effect,
Yeah.
that can take place.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about Black men and success and your stories, this is something where Percival Everett won the Pulitzer for James.
Yeah.
Where Brandon Jacobs Jenkins won the Pulitzer for the book of Purpose, a Broadway play, and where there was this massive Met Gala that was all about dandyism and Black men and dress and all of that. I mean, I sort of said, this is a week where it seems to me that something, positive is happening.
Well, yeah, I think, part of what I am showing in the film, and part of what I think is on display here is just a kind of the diversity of ourselves, of our experiences as Black men, as Black folk. And I think that it's important for that diversity within our community to be on full display, right? For Black folk to see the range of us and all the things that we're doing, but also for the wider public to see it as well.
And so you're teaching at Tufts.
Yes.
Talk to us about the title. I mean, the Professor of Storytelling. It has a longer name as well.
So yeah, I'm kind of I teach both scripted and documentary film, advise students of all kinds, and I kind of think of myself as kind of a keeper of storytelling, and I tell students, if you do the work, I will be there at every step of the way, and let's not get to a point where I'm more excited about your project than you are, right? Because I'm all in, and I think that that we all have something to say, and it's a matter of like being willing to sort of do the work and kind of rising to the occasion of communicating with our audience, right? And that takes time.
Well, the time of it is that, telling a story it seems like a simple thing, but it's very, very complex.
Yeah.
What do you say to your students as they're entering, the skills that they need?
Well, you always hear that writing is rewriting. You always hear that, to write what you know.
Right.
And I try to give them, on the one hand, I'm giving them a sort of a sense of what the kind of the work ethic, and in ways of sort of keeping the project interesting and sort of retaining your kind of excitement and your imagination for what's happening in these projects. But on the other hand, it's sort of like mining your own personal experience for not things that you can kind of like one-to-one sort of turn into a story, but for the feelings, right? The kind of the contradictions, the just sort of the things that didn't sit well with you, or on the other hand, the things that were truly joyful, in your past and in your present that might be a bridge between you and another human being.
Yeah, it's astonishing how, first of all, that most people don't think that whatever happened to them is important, or certainly fits within the history of the world,
Yeah.
But I was reading recently the story that a son had written about his dad, who was a guard in a park.
Okay.
And this whole idea of how history could place you in the center of things. Because he had a uniform, was assigned to cover a civil rights march in the 60s. And his assignment, because he was a sniper, was to keep his gun zeroed in on Martin Luther King Jr.
Gosh.
And if King made any move whatsoever to shoot him, which would have been So here within this completely ordinary life, and I think that most people don't think about those kinds of things, of how the part that they could be playing in our history.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's a time when we have more access, you know, to our lives, right, than ever before, right? You know, and sometimes it's like, well, what access are we getting? And then you hear a story like what you've just shared, and it's like there's a kind of a richness that's available. There's kind of a treasure, right, that's available to us, and I think, you know, that's something to sort of like to cherish and to kind of hold on and to kind of to build up.
Right. So what's up next for you in terms of projects and?
Yeah, so it's, you know, so like there's a story that ends the documentary. You know, there's a kind of a parable of the architect is what we'll talk about. So that story is the deep backstory for a set of screenplays that I had written, you know, kind of, you know, about, you know, 7 and 8 years ago now. So that's what I'm moving on to next. I mean, I have, there are smaller documentary projects, nonfiction projects that I'm working on. But what I'm most excited about at the moment is bringing to life the story of the descendants of this group of people who come out of this architect's vision.
I mean,
Yeah.
it is. I
Yeah.
mean, and it's so powerful because this is, your son has done some of
Yes.
the
Yeah.
animation for that. I mean, really quite good. But it's a structure that goes below the ground,
Yes.
where people are living. I mean, I can see it. I can see the film already. No.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, it's like the idea is that this guy had a vision for this building and kind of, you know, recruited these people as his tenants, so to
Right.
speak.
Right.
But after he's gone, they kind of become the inheritance of this project that he's been building.
Under,
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
it's tall, but it also goes that.
Yeah.
I mean, really.
So I'm excited about that project, and you know, which is goes into like the immediate aftermath of that, but then also kind of really kind of generations beyond from that moment. So
Right. So you're making these great films. Who inspired you? What did you look at to say, you know, well, you know, I think I can do that. I can do that better, in fact, right?
well, you know, because there's a kind of a performance in the film, and because I knew that I was going to have to be on camera a lot, and because I had created these portraits, and once I was making a film, continued to create these portraits, I think the work of Marlon Riggs is a work that has meant a lot to me.
Right.
You know, and
Tell us about it.
well, Marlon Riggs was a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, gay activist in the, you know, late '80s, you know, early '90s. His work, you know, Black Is, Black Ain't, is, you know, Color Adjustment. I mean, these are some kind of seminal texts, really, in the Black documentary tradition. And he is very much a part
Right.
of the making of these films, and very much a presence on camera. And his final project is really, it is, you know, his, you know, kind of giving himself over to both the illness that is taking his life, but also the project itself, and there's kind of a fusion there that is it's kind of beyond words, and so I, you know, not that my work is that work, but
I can see, I can see it, right? You know, it has, right. Yeah. It's great. Well, the Night Fight, where can anybody find it?
Well, at the moment, I would say go to our website, which is nightfightfilm.com.
Right.
We have a raft of festivals that we're planning to screen at here in the States, but also in Europe and around the world. So I would go there for the latest and greatest on the film.
On the film. Well, you've done a terrific, and your prospect. How are you doing now? I mean, do you think that you got exercised some by filmmaking, or by making the film of this, or?
You know,
No.
I'll say that, you know, at our screening last week, I had all the American contributors on stage at the same time.
Right.
All sort of participating in a Q&A. This is a Q&A that we had in South by Southwest. But last week we had everybody in on stage,
Right.
all sort of sharing, not just their bits and pieces of the story that did not make it into the film, but also talking about sort of like how participating in the film had, kind of conjured up kind of like a reflection that they had not done previously, and so that's sort of been my experience, is that the process has been what has continues to kind of create opportunities for me to sort of like talk about this and to find outlets for making sense of what happened, because it's still a kind of a mysterious incident.
Right, a mysterious thing. I sure hope you find this guy. The next film, you'll find him living under the architect's building.
Yeah. There's a story there too.
But I'm glad it is quite moving, and it makes you think about it, the father-son aspect of it. Making sure that he understands this. That he really. Which is still the tragedy of so many of our brown boys and girls, that they must learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a bridge for my son and I to talk about these things. My experience. What you learn as a parent is that your experience is not the experience of your kids. There are things that you have, that there's a world that you were born into that is like foreign to them, really, and so there has to be some way of kind of closing that gap.
Right. Well, good luck with the continued conversations on screen and off with your boys over this, and thanks to director and film editor, maker, writer Khary Saeed Jones for joining me to discuss his film Night Fight. That's it for us today. I'm Carol Jenkins. Thank you for joining us. The program is Black America, and we'll see you the next time. And now you can download the CUNY TV app in your Apple Store or in Google Play and find us there.